Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this edition of True Crime with the Sarge. I'm your host, Joseph Giacalone. Thanks for coming out tonight. We have a very special guest. He's already here. He's in the green room. I'm going to bring him in in a minute. But before we do that, I just want to let everybody know that tomorrow morning I'll be introducing my new morning show called Roll Call. It will be at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I have a couple of guests lined up. We're going to talk about some of the cases that are happening in the news that you guys are actually following too. So I'll discuss more of that in the morning. So if you're up bright and early tomorrow, check it out. If not, you can always catch it on the replay. Without any further ado, I'd like to bring in tonight's guest, Barry Fisher. Welcome, Barry. Barry spent 40 years in the LA County Sheriff's Forensic Lab. And for a while there, he was also the director of the lab. He's also written a textbook that's in its 9th edition, Techniques of Crime Scene Investigation, which he has co-authored with his son, who hopefully will be another future guest on the show. Barry, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, it's been a while since we spoke. I had you on the radio show a couple of years ago. So there are so many things that have changed over the last couple of years. We'll get into some of those changes tonight. We'll get into some anecdotes, some stories, and what have you. But I just want to go through some of the things. We're going to spend most of the night talking about forensics and crime scene stuff. But just tell us a little bit of the background about you and how you got involved with the LA County lab. And we know that you're a former New Yorker at first, right? So there's the other little tidbit in there.
Okay. Well, I grew up in the Bronx. I attended City College, CCNY, up in back in the 60s. I graduated there with a degree in chemistry and went on to graduate school at Purdue University, where I finished up with a master's degree. Along the way, I met my future wife and current wife. We've been married now 55 years, which is
Nice.
no mean feat. But anyway, she was visiting a girlfriend in New York, in Far Rockaway. Give you some New York geography. And her girlfriend happened to be dating my roommate in grad school. So Alice, the girlfriend, tells my roommate, Shelley, if you don't find a date for my friend visiting from Los Angeles, I won't be going out with you. So Shelley calls up his friends in Brooklyn and Queens to try to find somebody a little bit more geographically desirable, strikes out, and he calls me up asking with pleading in his voice, could you please do me a kindness and take this girl out? So I schlep out from the Bronx. I lived in Pelham Parkway down to Far Rockaway, which, the opposite end of the city, pretty much.
Yeah, that's a trip.
And so we went out. We went out a couple of times, and lo and behold, something happened. She went back to Los Angeles. I went back to Purdue. I invited her out to come back to New York over Christmas vacation that winter. She came back, and I went and visited her in LA in January for semester break. And then I went back again over Easter break, and we got engaged and subsequently got married. So I was in Los Angeles after finishing school, after finishing Purdue, and I was looking around for a job, and I needed a special job because I was no longer, this is back in the day when they still had a draft during the Vietnam War. Some of your listeners may have heard about that in their ancient history classes. So I was looking around, and I submitted a resume to everybody and their uncle. And I finally get a call from this guy who worked for the state California Department of Human Resources and says, I got a job that you might be interested in. And he says, have you ever seen a TV show, Perry Mason? I said, yeah, what about it? He says, just like that. Turns out that the LA County Sheriff's Department was literally drowning in dope cases, and they needed to hire chemists to shovel out the backlog. So miraculously or fortuitously, I got hired. My concerns about getting drafted vanished. They got me. The sheriff wrote a nice letter to my draft board in the Bronx on Arthur Avenue, and he. Next thing I know, I get this card in the mail that I had a critical skills deferment. So I started to work there back in May 5th, which out here would be Cinco de Mayo, 1969. I had no idea what I was getting into. There was kind of a disconnect at the time because they hired a bunch of young guys who were fresh out of college who didn't quite get into the police culture. We would be at each other's throats more often than not. They would call us long-haired pinko commies, and we would say that they were, the far right wing John Birch Society, which is no longer exists anymore. But eventually, we made our peace. The first couple of years was difficult to adjust, but once I got into the beat, the rhythm of the place, I tell you, Joe, there's no finer career out there than something in law enforcement, whether it's a beat cop or a forensic science nerd working in the laboratory. It's the most fulfilling, exciting, interesting career that anybody could possibly want, and it's also rewarding. You feel like you're doing something, giving back to the community. So I started back there, and they first had me working in the area called toxicology, looking for drugs in people's blood and urine samples. The nature of drugs back then was a lot simpler than it is today. Pretty much all we were looking for were barbiturates and amphetamines, and of course alcohol. A lot of drunk driving out my way. And I worked there for a while, and eventually got all the job title there was called criminalists. We're all civilians. And all the criminalists in the lab, at the time, there were a total of 12 of us. Now there are a couple of hundred today, but back then there were 12 of us. And we were required to go out to crime scenes, serious murder cases, pretty much. And it was kind of a hazing sort of situation. The more experienced guys, there were no women there at the time. The more experienced guys like to take the newbies out and try to get them to be barfing on the sidewalk by showing them the most disturbing and disgusting crime scenes that they could possibly imagine. So finally, my number came up, and they one afternoon they dragged me away, kicking and screaming. At that time, I'd never seen a dead body in my life. Which has since changed, of course, but they took me in a company car. We drove out to this nice residential area, and as we're riding out there, I said, what kind of case is this? And one of them says to me in a very nonchalant way, well, it's an axe murder. I said, oh. So we go into the location, to the crime scene. Is a middle-class residential home. What had happened was that this was a woman in her mid to late 30s who was murdered. Her teenage daughter, who was coming home from school, found her mother dead in the living room. The victim was confronted by a residential burglar who had gained entrance into the house with a roofing axe. There was a scuffle. Furniture was overturned in the living room where they obviously fought. And he used the axe, and when we got there, it was sticking out of her skull with brains and blood splattered on the wall and ceiling from cast off. And I can still, it's over 50 years now, I can still picture her lying there. Her eyes were still open. her hand was kind of like in her mouth. She had this look of terror in her face. And when I first saw it, I thought I was looking at a mannequin. I couldn't believe I was looking at a dead human being. It was the most, at the time, the most horrific thing I had ever seen. And I think that if you talk to anybody in this business, they will be able to regale you with the story of their first major crime scene that they came across and how it affected them. You have to be able, if you're going into this profession, to compartmentalize, to keep the work stuff in one part of your head and the personal stuff in another part of the head, and try to keep them separate, because you can't go through life looking depressed and worried about everything. You have to get on with your life and look at the happier things. Anyway, that's the long of the short of how I got into the forensic business.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like I said, everybody, we've talked about this from time to time about how difficult it is sometimes from law enforcement officers to get the help that they need and that kind of thing, because you see stuff that is just awful, and you try to, so you actually put it in a good way about compartmentalization, and it's just something that we all have to do. So we've known you've been to God knows how many crime scenes. Let's talk about some of the mistakes that we need to be aware of, right? So for law enforcement officers, like, what are some of the things that you saw over your career that you need to point out and say that we have to make sure we do a better job with certain things?
Well, naturally, the first police personnel that come to the crime scene are typically uniformed officers. They're not going to be responsible for investigating the case. The detectives are going to be doing that. And they have to be aware that the crime scene is a fairly delicate place, that you want to be careful not to be trampling over evidence or picking up things. Doesn't happen now as much, but cops used to be smoking at crime scenes and leaving their cigarette butts in ashtrays. Of course, you could do some blood typing off of the saliva of the butts, and when you don't know who's who, that makes it a little bit more difficult. Or like using the restroom and then flushing. Well, the bad guy could have flushed the toilet too, and that would obliterate the fingerprints. Going through the kitchen and grabbing a glass or cup to get a drink of water, same sort of thing. You may be destroying prints or just confusing things. So if you go into a crime scene, you just have to be aware that evidence, particularly microscopic evidence or latent print evidence, is fleeting, and it can be easily destroyed or dislodged. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Typically, you want to just do a cursory examination of the scene, check for signs of life. Obviously, that's going to be your first, the first and primary thing you want to do. If the person is still alive, you want to get the emergency paramedics out there to render assistance and transport. If the person is dead, you just want to back out of the crime scene and secure it and keep people away. If there are witnesses to the crime that occurred, you want to transport them back to the precinct. Ideally, keep them separate so they're not sharing stories. You'd like to get a fresh glimpse of what happened. If the media shows up, which is always a problem, you're not in a position as the first officers at the crime scene to be flapping your gums to the news media. That's for either the public information officer on your department or the detectives, if they want to share any kind of information, because that information is going to get into the news media. And later on, if a suspect is developed, that person can say, well, I heard this this information, or I read about it in the newspapers, and that's how I knew this stuff. You want to keep this particulars about the case down low, quiet, so it doesn't color any particular information. You also want to think about canvassing the crime scene, canvassing the area, talking to neighbors to find out if they heard anything or saw anything, and going around neighborhoods and looking for any discarded evidence. It's not unusual for the bad guys to dump things, put them into trash containers, or just throw them away, and that could be a very useful bit of information. But those kinds of things typically happen after the scene is secured and the detectives are present.
Actually, we have a good question here. It says from Tev. It says, do you think that law enforcement officers are more aware these days, I guess, about these forensics and stuff? We hope so, right?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, there's been a lot of bad publicity for police handling crime scenes as well as crime labs handling evidence. All you have to do is follow, like back in New York, you have the Innocence Project with Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld. Those two guys started it. And they've done a pretty decent job of highlighting problems that law enforcement agencies have in conducting investigations. A lot of these things are not purposeful. Some of them are, but this kind of thing filters down. And I think if you're paying it any kind of attention out there, that the general public, as well as people that work in public safety jobs, are likely to be more aware of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where, unfortunately, there's miscarriages of justice that happen. We got to make sure we avoid those at all costs. And, unfortunately, there's no standard training throughout the whole country. And that's part of the problem.
Well, that is indeed a part of the problem. But I know that in New York City, you have two very decent forensic laboratories. You have the NYPD and you have the medical examiner's DNA lab, and they do a very fine job in taking care of things. The main problem is that in New York, as well as around the country, tend to be overwhelmed with too much work. And the better a laboratory becomes in delivering decent, high quality services, the more evidence that comes in for them to work on, and it feeds on itself, and it's difficult to get the cities, counties, or state governments to pony up with enough resources to hire adequate personnel and provide training.
Yeah, because there's been a couple of cases that have been in the news recently that you just kind of shake your head and you see what things are going on at the crime scene, and you just kind of, just saying, hey, my God, like, how can we keep on doing this? But, here we are, 2025, 2024, and you figured that by now they'd have some of these things figured out. But no. So we talked, like I said, a long time ago, and you had told me a story because we had talked about one of the mistakes that sometimes investigators make is that they get this tunnel vision. And you told me a story about a famous actor at the time, way back when. His name was Sal Mineo. Would you mind telling the audience the story?
Well, by tunnel vision, I mean an investigator gets out to a crime scene, looks around, and makes some initial conclusions, and then takes that and runs with it till he can't run anymore. We had an interesting case quite a number of years ago. A movie star by the name of Sal Mineo, as Joe mentioned. You can Google him. He was an up and coming actor who starred in a lot of number of big pictures at the time. And he happened to be gay, and he lived in in a community out here in the LA area, which many gays, homosexual people lived in. He was murdered while getting out of his car in his carport, and the cops came out. Detectives pretty quickly decided that this was a love triangle kind of thing, that Sal and his boyfriend got into a tiff and he was killed because of that. And that notion stuck with these detectives for years. It's a homicide case, so there's no statute of limitations. That case is going to go on forever. Until, lo and behold, a totally different case is going to trial. Guy is in county jail waiting to go to trial, and he decides to play that TV show, Let's Make a Deal, with the district attorney's office. And he says, I'll tell you what, if you cut me some slack, I'll plead guilty. I'd like a decent resolution to my case, and I'll tell you how Sal Mineo got murdered. So there was a lot of bad press about plea bargaining at that time. But the DA decided to have a listen, and the guy told his tale that it was just a random street crime sort of carjacking situation. And during the tussle, victim was murdered. They were able to track down the killers and subsequently put them on trial and get them convicted. But 2-3 years wound up being passed because of this tunnel vision issue that they just couldn't let go of.
Yeah, big mistake, right? I just wanted a quick shout out. Thanks, Jersey. Says Joe, thank you for all your grace and having such amazing and humble guests on. So that's for you too, Barry. Thank you very much, Jersey. So, talk about a major mistake, right? So you make a mistake like that, and then the case goes cold, basically, and then you get lucky, right, and solve it at the end there. But so you've written a textbook on techniques of crime scene investigation. What is some of the main takeaways that you think not only students that are studying this now, but even now cops in the field? What do you think is the biggest takeaway that investigators need to do, let's say from your books per se?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is to use your brain. You use a little common sense when you're out there. Every crime scene is different. As you go through your career, you develop more expertise and understand how to handle cases, what's important, how to behave at a crime scene, what to do, what not to do. And you need to capitalize on that. And I always counsel, particularly younger people, to reach out and befriend or become friends with more senior investigators or criminalists or whatnot, people that you can go to gain their expertise through some sort of mentorship. That's an important thing. But in terms of the actual hands-on crime scene investigation, you want to recognize that you typically have one bite of the apple. There are no mulligans, do-overs in most of these cases. You're going to have to get it right the first time. So while you're out there, be sure to stop, think, and go over it a couple of times with some other people. If you're dealing with, the problem in the New York and environments is it's a very densely populated area. So if you have for example, a murder on a busy street, you're not going to be able to stop traffic forever to do as thorough investigation as you might like to do. There's always exceptions, but for the most part, the city council and the mayor wants to get those streets open again, and doesn't want you to be dawdling out there. So you just have to kind of use your use your brain and try to do as best you can. If you also need to know your limitations. If you don't know what you're doing out there, stop and talk to somebody. We had a big case here in Los Angeles years ago. It was at a preschool in a suburban area, and there was the belief that these children, these 4 and 5-year-old kids, were being molested, and they were being threatened by the teachers. Allegedly, they would take a rabbit or some other pet animal and kill it right in front of these kids and say, if you tell anybody, this is what's going to happen to you and your family, and then bury the remains in an adjacent lot right next to the school. So the parents were getting upset with the lack of timeliness that the local police agency, was a relatively small police department who didn't have a lot of experience in major cases, was doing, and they went out and hired a backhoe and started to dig up the adjacent property. And of course, as luck would have it, they find a skeleton of a turtle, a fairly decent sized tortoise. So everything stops, and the media is out there. And I got a call. It was on a Saturday night from my boss saying, the sheriff wants you and a team out there to excavate this lot. And whatever you do, don't F it up. So that's a term of art.
Nope.
I'm sure
yeah, no pressure there, right?
So we get out there and we start poking around, and it became obvious to me that we were above our depth or below our depth. We had never, none of us had ever excavated a lot. And I called the head officer, the officer in charge over. I said, his name was Roger. I said, Roger, we don't know what we're doing out here. And if we screw this up, it's going to come up in court 6 months or so later, and we're all going to look stupid. So why don't we just seal up the crime scene, go to a local college or university that has an archaeology department, and hire them to do it the right way. So they wound up doing that. I'll put a postscript on this. They paid this university $25,000 to excavate this corner lot, only later to find out that this was the neighborhood pet cemetery where the neighbors would take their pet animals when they died and do their last rites at the dig a hole in the ground. But you live and learn. But the point is, try not to get involved with things that you know little or nothing about, because it's sure as heck is going to come back and bite you.
Yes. Let's talk about crime scene management, because it's one of the things that I did an interview with Fox News yesterday in regards to this Brian Kohlberger case, and I haven't been happy the way they handled the crime scene. But I talk about if you can explain to the audience that's watching, what's some of the most important aspects of crime scene management that they need to make sure that they take care of, meaning the police?
Well, somebody has to be in charge of that crime scene. Typically, if it's a murder case, it's going to be a homicide detective who is handling that stuff, and everything needs to go through that person. I don't care if you're the crime lab person, the person doing the CSI person, even the medical examiner's office needs to coordinate things with the investigator. The latter is sometimes a problem because under most state laws, the medical examiner has oversight over the body and clothing that the person is wearing. But ultimately, that detective needs to be everything running through them. And you just can't have people doing their own thing. And of course, the bigger the crime scene. You look at something like 9/11, which was a monster crime scene with multiple city, state, and federal agencies involved. You need to figure out at the earliest possible time who's in charge, who's running the show, what has to be done, in what order, and stay on top of everything. So communication and coordination are the two key factors in doing that. Now, the devil, of course, is in the detail. And if people are not used to working with one another, that becomes more of a challenge. But I think that there is, at least in more sophisticated police environments, there's an understanding of how this process is supposed to be working. And I'm sure there are drills and scenarios that investigators go through to learn what to be doing.
Well, one of the things that I brought up, and you kind of briefly talked about that, is the gatekeeper, right? The uniform cop that keeps records of who enters the scene and when. How important do you think that is for a crime scene management?
Well, note-taking is important across the board, whether it's the detective, the CSI, the forensic scientist, to take good contemporaneous notes. But the gatekeeper, the so-called gatekeeper, the person who's guarding the crime scene and allowing people in and out, he's also a traffic cop, and he needs to be able to keep non-essential people out, namely the press, family members, looky-loos, neighbors, and even brass who want to come by for a little looky-loo, a drive-by to see what happened. And that's sometimes a little bit more difficult to, if a police captain or above is coming by and he wants to have a look-see, how do you handle that? Well, one way, it's not a foolproof way, is to have him sign in, take his name and his ID number and whatnot, and mention to him that this will be in the report, and he may have to go to court and testify that he was there. It's not foolproof, but it may slow some people down. Remember that if you're dealing with a really, really significant case with if there's a public official involved, none of that is going to work. You can try your damnedest. A lowly patrolman is not going to keep out some politician from going through the crime scene, even if he starts leaning on his sidearm to try to show how serious he is about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's some issues in regards to some of these scenes that I've been following, because it's just like people just walking in all hours of the night, just walking into this crime scene, removing stuff, taking it out. This guy. I hope there's a crime scene log somewhere inside that these people are signing in and out. Well, time in, time out.
Right. One of the worst cases I've seen out here was there was a movie theater, and it was closing up, and a couple of robbers came in to hold the place up and steal the money from the till. They wound up murdering 4 people from the crime scene. They slit their throats, blood everywhere. It was a mess. They didn't follow the simple rules that we were just talking about. It was like everybody and their uncle had access to the scene. They had people parading in and out, taking pictures on their own. It was a total. It was a cluster F, if you know what I mean. It was bad. Hopefully, the more times these situations become people, particularly cops, become aware of them, the less likely they will make the same mistakes.
Yes, unfortunately, though, I see them quite often. But I just want to take a quick timeout second there. Dees, thank you very much for your donation today. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah, no, there's some things that I always don't like. I always say I do these interviews and then I put a helmet on because I know I'm going to get all kinds of comments that people aren't going to like about it. But it is what it is. I mean, it's
Right.
just that we have rules. There are policies and procedures that are pretty standard, so much in regards to a crossing. But chain of custody is extremely important too, right? So, who had the evidence and when? Um, what's your take on the chain of custody issues that in regards to crime scene stuff? I know you've covered it in your textbook.
Well, chain of custody and reviewing that concept is being able to show that what was collected during the investigation and what ultimately shows up in court is the same thing. And you can show who collected it, when it was collected, and any other pertinent information in terms of information that's placed on the envelope or the tag that accompanies the item. A couple of things to keep in mind about chain of custody is you just can't go into a crime scene and pick up anything that suits your fancy. You may want to at least consider a search warrant if you're going through a car or a house where you're looking for stuff that is not in plain sight or that could be destroyed because of if you're serving a search warrant and you're worried it's a dope deal and you're worried about the bad guys going into the toilet to flush it down the drain, you can claim it's an exigent circumstance and basically knock down the door and get hold of it. Or if somebody's life, you're concerned about somebody's life being in danger, you can enter a private residence and get hold of it. So that's a major issue to at least keep in mind. In some jurisdictions, if it's a big enough case, the local prosecutor's office may have a district attorney kind of follow you around in the crime scene, and you can ask what they think about a particular circumstance. Getting a search warrant is not the most difficult thing in the world, but it does slow you down a little. And if you don't do it, you're going to wind up
regretting it.
I'll tell you a quick story. This was early on in my career, and I didn't know any better because I wouldn't put up with it today. It was a hot Sunday afternoon, and we're in a police impound yard waiting for a search warrant to pop a trunk. And we're waiting and waiting and waiting, and the two detectives are passing around a flask. I said, "No, thank you. It's too early in the day for me to imbibe." And one of them says, "I'm tired of waiting." He pulls out a crowbar and pops the trunk. And he says, "Don't worry, we'll just backdate the search warrant after the fact." I would have had these guys' backside. Minimally, I would have put it into my report so it would be discoverable. But those sorts of actions just cause any sorts of problem down the road because you have this doctrine of fruit of the poison tree. If you don't follow the legal rules in gathering evidence, that evidence and any information that you derive from that evidence cannot be admitted into a trial. So you've just really screwed yourself in not being able to use it.
Yep, just because of no patience. So Buttercup's got a great question here. Thank you very much, Buttercup. But I don't know how familiar you are with the Idaho case, the Idaho 4 case. But he says, ask Barry what he thinks about the Idaho house getting knocked down before the trial, right? So you had this huge crime scene, and then they knocked down before.
Well, probably not a great idea. But the question is, what legal authority did anybody have to stop that from happening? I suppose the police or the prosecutors could have gotten a stay from some judge not to do it. I don't know if they did that or not, and if it was overruled. But you know, stuff happens. What can I
Yeah.
tell you?
No, what happened is, yeah, so the prosecutor was okay with it. The defense was okay with it. So the judge said, I'm okay with it. And that was
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So I thought that was an error that they should have just they waited so long. But we know it's in the middle of the university, the whole kind of things. It
Mhm.
attracts people, and I'm trying to explain to people that it doesn't matter if the building's there or not. It's still going to be a thing where people are going to go visit. It's just
Right.
simple as that.
There's no right or wrong answers to these things. It comes down to a balancing act. You have to weigh both sides of the issue, and somebody has to make a decision about what's best.
Yes. Hope, thank you much for gifting that membership too. I appreciate that. So I just want to circle back to the search warrant thing because it's something that a lot of people still don't understand. That as soon as somebody has that, when you're in the investigation, the emergency's over, you found the bodies and there's no other additional bodies, and you said it before, you pull out and you assess the situation, right? To see if you're going to need a search warrant at that point. Anybody who has absolute right to privacy, and since most people are murdered by someone they know, there's a good possibility you're going to need one. But I still see things that happen that you just kind of like shake your head, like you're rolling the dice.
Well, as a general rule, if say you're in a residence and somebody's murdered there, um, you as an investigator can collect anything that's in plain sight. However, if you have to start rummaging through drawers and going into closed rooms, then you really need to figure out if you need a search warrant or not. Um, Oftentimes, it's a fairly easy thing to get. You also have to consider if it's a rental property. Can the renter give permission, or does the owner have to give permission? There are a lot of wrinkles in this whole business, and the best way to be sure is to contact your local prosecutor's office. They have people on duty 24/7 who can help you muddle you through these issues.
Yep, no, absolutely, right. When in doubt, fill it out was our motto.
Yep.
Because you don't want to make a mistake like that and then have to answer it out too on top of that. As for investigators or even crime scene techs, what do you think are some of the like innate skills or skills that people would need to become an investigator or a crime scene tech? What would be some of those skills that you think you would recommend for people that have, or at least enhance?
Well, you need to be kind of a detail oriented. You want to be a good observer, pick up on things that don't belong or do belong, and understand what their relevance is. Once you have that down, the next thing you need to be able to do is communicate that information not only to the investigators, but to the courts, prosecutors, both in writing and in oral. If you go to court to testify, you have to be able to do that. I know that, well, in my case, when I first got started, I was terrified about public speaking. When I had to go to court, I remembered I would have to show up a half hour earlier to use the restroom to take care of business because my stomach was just in an uproar. And eventually, I got on top of that, and I became comfortable with it. I even enjoyed jousting with lawyers while on the witness stand. These days, I recommend to people who have concerns about their public speaking skills to join a group like Toastmasters. They're all over the country, and it teaches you to have some confidence and poise in speaking. But communication in general is an important skill. I'm surprised these days. We hire in the laboratory. We hire people with college degrees and advanced degrees, and they still don't know how to write. they have misspellings in their report, run-on sentences. It's like you're dealing with somebody in grade school in terms of their communication skills. But that's just my thing.
Right, but the two big skills that you mentioned, right, the communication skills and observation skills can be improved, but you, the person, want to improve them.
Exactly. You have to want to do it, and you can do it if you set your mind to it.
Exactly. So we're gonna do that, right? I give out these quizzes every day on the page, and then we do some forensic stuff and some crime scene stuff. I guess we're gonna have to do some observation stuff too, just to get people into the mode of improving their observation skills. So, how about documentation in crime scenes? How important is documentation?
Documents, well, during a course of a period of time, you could be handling multiple crime scenes. I remember I was on call one busy weekend. I had 5 murders I had to go to. And I had the trunk of my car filled with evidence from different cases. And but for the ability to take some halfway decent notes and drawings, it would be a physical impossibility to recall what's going on. There are several types of notes that you want to take. You want to take written notes. You want to crime scene sketches. Crime scene photography is important. Some agencies, depending on the seriousness of the crime, may do video the crime scene to see what's out there. Nowadays, they also have these commercial devices that do like a blueprint of the crime scene. They stick a device on top of a tripod, and it slowly goes around, taking high definition, collecting high definition data and putting it into a skeleton, and you can put the actual room pictures in it, and you can look at the crime scene from different points of view, from the perpetrator's point of view, the assailant's point of view, and get a good idea. The trouble with the latter is that the equipment is costly, it's time consuming, and you can't use it on every single case. You would reserve it for only the most serious cases that you're dealing with. But documentation of the crime scene is crucial, not only for you, but for the investigators. And you have to remember some of these cases go on for years, and the detective who worked on the case may be retired or gone, and you have to go back and rely on the notes that they've taken on the case. And if you don't have good notes, you're screwed.
Yeah, I've been to that movie. Did cold case stuff. So Katie has a question here. She says, did you notice a decline in the quality of police recruits, I guess, over the years?
It's a tough business to get into these days, with this BS about defunding the police and people wanting to just tear holes into the entire profession. Many people are just asking themselves, do I want to even subject myself to this stuff? Salaries in many parts of the country don't tend to be terribly inviting. It's a tough job, not including the notion that you may not be coming home at the end of your watch. You may be leaving a widow and children behind because of some idiot out there who has got a gun and is going to take your life. All of that together make it much more difficult for police departments to hire and recruit individuals. I think that it's a buyer's market these days. If you decide that you want to be a law enforcement officer, a CSI, a crime lab person, there are lots of jobs available, but it's a tough profession. I know in the crime lab business, we used to call it the hoo-ha moment. You know, you're at a social event and you're sitting around with a cocktail or a bottle of beer, and people are sharing, well, what do you do? What do you do? And you say, well, I work in a law enforcement crime lab, and all of a sudden the room goes silent and people want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
That's a cool thing. But the other side of it is that you tend to see the worst of the worst. You get to see the underbelly of society, and you have to guard against this, because over time you become you take on this notion that it's a we-they kind of thing. It's us against the world. And while there are a lot of bad people out there who don't deserve their freedom, and in some cases ought to be put down, fortunately, the most people in society are decent, and you don't want to get caught up into that idea that anybody who doesn't carry around a badge or a police ID doesn't deserve the time of day. So it's something to consider. And the other thing I always warn people is that you will probably start off your career a lot more liberal than you will end up your career, because of the environment that you're in. It's just the fact of life.
Yeah, it's pretty much what I echo to some of my students. I'm like, if this is something you have this calling, this is something you want to do. If you want to be a law enforcement officer, now is the time, because we've seen, you've seen a lot more than I have over your career, because you spend a lot more time doing it. But it ebbs and flows, right? You go through some of these situations, and then 5 years from now, 10 years from now, things can do a complete 180, because eventually the wheels are going to come off the cart, and and people are going to wake up, and they're going to say, "This is ridiculous."
Right. And it tends to go back and forth. I look at what happens with people when they get convicted of crimes. You start off where a notion of, we're going to throw the key away, we're going to lock them up forever. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we want to try to rehabilitate these people. Well, when you start locking people up and throwing away the key, that means you have to start building more custody facilities, more jails and prisons. And people don't like to have jails and prisons in their backyard. It's a NIMBY effect, not in my backyard. Plus, taxes tend to go up, and they don't want to pay them, so they become more and more liberal. And then they start allowing people back on the streets, and there's a certain amount of recidivism, and then people get tired of it, and they go back to the other way. There's no happy medium, and people who are a lot smarter than you and me, Joe, have yet to figure out how to solve this conundrum, and I don't think it's solvable.
No, it's not. And like Tiffany just brought out, there's a pendulum, and I said the pendulum swings back and forth, and there never seems to be a happy medium, right? It's always one way. It's either far left or far right. Nothing down the middle. Common sense, like you said, which is not that common anymore. Is there a famous case that you worked on that you could share with us? Or what would be, out in LA with the land of the stars? Is there something? Is there one that you can?
One case that was not ours was the O.J. Simpson case, which I was really happy about, because that was an LAPD case. Los Angeles County is about close to the size of the state of Connecticut. And within the county, there are 70-odd municipalities, the biggest of which is the city of Los Angeles. And they go down from there to itty-bitty cities with maybe a dozen or so cops in them. The sheriff's department, which is a county official, an elected official, is responsible for all the areas that are non-incorporated, that are not part of any particular city. And then in addition, cities can contract with the sheriff's department to provide them with police services. In terms of the crime lab, we would provide um, laboratory services for the sheriff's department and any municipality in the county that wants to use our services. The LAPD, which is the biggest city in the county with a population of about 3 million people, chose years ago to open their own laboratory. Matter of fact, a little bit of trivia: the LAPD crime lab was the first crime lab in the United States, established in 1923. Our lab started up in about 1928 in the sheriff's lab. But in terms of the most, that was a little preview so I could start to keep my brain thinking about a famous case that we worked on. We've handled a number of high-profile cases. The Phil Spector case was one of them. Phil, another New York boy who made it big in the entertainment business. He was big in record recording and whatnot. He produced some of the Beatles records. He did a bunch of Motown stuff. He was a weird kind of guy who, in later years, he would go out to bars and restaurants and try to pick up women and tell them that he would get them entree into the business, into the entertainment business, and he would take them home with him. And he had a tendency, according to the trial that later happened, of taking out a gun and threatening them and putting the gun barrel in his mouth and kind of doing fellatio on the gun barrel. He was a sick puppy. In any event, one of these women didn't want to go along with his antics, and he was threatening him with a gun. And the gun discharged, and the woman was killed. Phil claimed it was an accident, didn't mean to happen. The people, district attorney and the investigators, felt that it was his doing. One of the pieces of evidence, it was a very minor piece of evidence at the time, was that on his jacket sleeve there was some very fine misting of blood. You shoot somebody in the head, and there's some blowback of blood and tissue and whatnot. And because of the very small nature of that, it's only going to go so far. He claimed that he was standing back about 7 or 8 feet when the gun accidentally fired. We found the stuff on his sleeve, which indicated to us that he was much closer, probably within 2 or 3 feet, which, kind of put to question his story. Anyway, the case goes to trial. He assembles one of these dream teams to defend him. I happen to know one of the defense attorneys from one of my professional organizations, and I go to the courtroom. The whole floor of this courthouse is sealed off because there was so much media attention and whatnot. They just shut it down, and you couldn't get to any of the courtrooms on this floor. So I go in, I show him my badge, and walk in, and I see this woman, and she says, "I want to call you as an expert witness for the defense to discuss that this procedure that was used wasn't verified, wasn't proven to be true." We're sitting there chewing the fat, and Phil comes out, and he's got two bodyguards with him. He's got these two black fellows who are like cubicle in shape. They were like 5'5" in each direction. They looked like their knuckles would be dragging on the ground. Big, brawny guys on either side of the defendant. So we're talking, and I said, I can't do this. I had already talked with the district attorney, and I said, this procedure that was used by one of our scientists there, she was a PhD from University of Southern California in biology, brilliant woman. And I think that her observations that she made were spot on. Well, it turned out that the first go around was a hung jury. They couldn't get a conviction. The second time around, they retried the case. This time he was convicted of second-degree murder. He recently died in prison. They put him away, and it was one of these high-profile cases that happens in all the major cities in the country, whether it's New York or Los Angeles or Chicago. You have these cases that just make the national attention and give people like Joe an opportunity to go on CNN or whatever and pontificate about his expertise.
Yeah, I guess Phil, his main criminal act after that was his hairdo, right? He had this.
He had a whole series of wigs that he would
Yeah.
wear, and he wasn't listening to his lawyer's recommendation to dress for success in the courtroom and wear conservative clothing. The one day I was there, he was wearing one of these long frock coats, kind of a beige colored thing. If it was black, it would be something that you'd see in Borough Park, New York, or Abraham Lincoln wearing. He just and a big afro wig out to there. It was just a weird kind of guy. He was very good at what he did in producing records and whatnot, but he was a bubble off.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna get one of those wigs for Halloween next year.
You need something to cover it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know what though, it was a distraction in the trials. I remember seeing pieces of it. I mean, that's what everybody was focusing on, right? Is
right.
Like what he was going to do and this and that. Is there anything that you wanted that I didn't ask you tonight that you thought might have been important for people to hear about crime scene management, or
Well, I will reiterate what I said before. If you are considering a profession in law enforcement, whether it's being a police officer, a detective, a CSI, a forensic scientist, you could not ask for a more fulfilling, rewarding profession. Everybody I know that is part of this fraternity that I know are stand-up people. They the salt of the earth. They're wonderful, wonderful people who are only interested in doing what's right by the people that they serve. Not to minimize the few rotten apples that we have in the barrel, because there will be in any barrel, but you want to give consideration and thoughtful consideration about getting into this business, because there's nothing like it.
And we will leave it at that, Barry. Hope to have you on again in the future. This was fantastic. I said the hours just go by like this. Everyone is enjoying the conversation, and there's lots of different things, and we're going to talk about some more cases.
Thank you for having me. I mentioned to my son David, who is a professor at New Jersey Institute of Technology. He runs their undergraduate forensic program. That you might want to have him on, and he said,
absolutely.
Bring it on.
Okay, great. So we're gonna and after that maybe we'll have a father-son show too on there. That'd be cool.
Maybe. All right.
Maybe. All right, everybody. Listen, Thank you for joining us tonight. Barry, you hang on one second. We're going to end the show. You guys have a great night. We'll talk to you soon.